Look, very briefly, it's just a part of this that Jon Stewart touched on as far as Joe Biden being there. And it talks about, it says Trump's inaugural of optimism. This, I think, was written well before he pardoned the January 6th convicts who violently savaged police officers. And if you talk to the family, would say it was responsible for the death of 4 law enforcement officers. But I just want to touch on the part of Joe Biden being there and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush, people that Donald Trump has attacked savagely. And so many people saying, why are they there? Why would they be there? This is terrible. They shouldn't be there. This being Donald Trump, there was an inevitable list of grievances about the administration he is succeeding. If anyone expected a grace note toward President Biden or Kamala Harris, there wasn't one. And give them credit for showing up after a defeat, unlike Mr. Trump 4 years ago. And the Wall Street Journal goes on, and they're very they're positive about President Trump's inaugural speech. I just want to say, Mike, and I just want to say this because I don't think many people would do what Joe Biden and Jill Biden and Hillary and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Laura Bush would have done. But they've never sat in that position and understood that the most important part of transitions is the peaceful part. And while we are deeply concerned about so much that happened yesterday, I want to say that peaceful transitions, what makes it so special in America is not that it's easy, but that it's hard. And when we didn't have it 4 years ago, and when Donald Trump didn't show up 4 years ago, and when the rioters did show up 4 years ago, that is not a reason to skip it 4 years later. That is all the more reason to bite your tongue, sit down, and show Americans what has happened over 240 years, and pray to God that in the coming years, there will be a return to that normalcy.
You know, I would also submit, Joe, that the fact that President Biden and his wife, Hillary Clinton, and former President Clinton, former President Bush and his wife, Laura, and former President Barack
and
Obama,
President Obama, yes,
all sat in the same row alongside each other and witnessed what everyone witnessed yesterday, was perhaps the one true ring of democracy that we saw yesterday, one true ring of civility. The other thing that was shocking to me, maybe I'm the only one, was the absolute lack of grace and graciousness in President Trump's speech, especially when he announced to the crowd about the hostages, 3 hostages being released. The crowd erupts in applause. He never even looks at President Biden, who invited Trump's representatives to join in the talks to free the hostages. Never once looked at him when he uttered that. Never once thanked him for his cooperation or thanked him for allowing 2 sides, the Trump people and the Biden people, to pursue the release of the hostages. Not once. That was the most shocking part.
Well, this is where the conversation goes down the drain. I realize this. They would say that the same lack of grace was given to them. That's what they would say. And that is, they would say, well, look what they did to us. It's far worse.
Who's that?
The Trump team.
Well, that is what they think. That is what they think. That's why
this conversation.
You talk to anybody around Donald Trump, Steph, and they will say, Joe Biden tried to put me in jail. He made me spend X amount of dollars and da-da-da. And when Mika says that's where the conversation
I've heard it,
goes down the drain, that's where the conversation goes down the drain, because you've talked to people close to the president. We have talked to the president and people close to the president. And they're not playing for the crowds when they say these people targeted us and wanted us to be in jail for the rest of our lives so they wouldn't have to run against us. Again, we're just explaining that's their thought process. If you want to know their thought process, fine. And if you don't,
this is it.
That's great. You don't need to know it, but that's where they're coming from.
For sure, but
we were shocked, but go ahead.
But then give them no more ammunition. Give them no more ammunition to be, they think this. Show up, just like all the former presidents did.
Right.
And they were there. They witnessed everything Donald Trump said, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Washington Post once said, democracy dies in darkness. Don't let Donald Trump only be in his lane for his people to see him. No. All of those former presidents were sitting there. They were there because all of them understand what it's like to put country first. Mm-hmm. And each one of them put their pride, put their ego aside. What do you think it was like for Jill and Joe Biden to stand there and receive Donald Trump yesterday? What do you think it was like for Kamala Harris? You think she wanted to do that? Absolutely not. It was an exercise, an important democratic exercise in putting country first, and they all did it.
Well, and Willie, there was a moment when Nancy Pelosi had said that she prayed for Donald Trump a couple of years ago, and Donald Trump said that's absolutely ridiculous. Well, in one of the key passages in the New Testament, Jesus says, pray for those who persecute you. Mm-hmm. Love your enemies. And then Jesus goes on and says, if you only love those who love you, what good are you? Even the sinners do that. And the message throughout the New Testament is, do not hold yourself to the standards of others. Your job is to rise above that standard. So this may be, at least in my mind, the civic version of that. Do not judge what you should do based on what they did to you 4 years ago. Be above it and show up, regardless of how excruciating it had to be personally.
Notably, Nancy Pelosi was not there yesterday, did not attend the inauguration, and I love you because you love me seems to be Donald Trump's guiding principle. As long as you love me, if you're good to me, I got you back. And we see that.
But it wasn't MLK's, and yesterday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, obviously. Yeah. And think about his words and his teachings. He obviously would show up. He deeply believes that darkness doesn't beat darkness.
Yeah,
not a mention of that.
Donnie, obviously grace and humility are not on the menu for Donald Trump. We probably weren't going to see that yesterday, but some have hoped and maybe still hope that now that he's a two-term president, he did it. He won the office back. He's in history as a two-term president. He's the most powerful political force we've seen in a long time in this country. He might at least settle into a confidence where he didn't have to go back yesterday and talk about the 2020 election, all the ways he's been aggrieved and mistreated, and that he could guide the country in a more unifying way. I know that might be naive, but there was hope that perhaps because now he has climbed all the way back to the top, that he could be a different kind of president than he was the first time around.
Yeah. I want to talk about civility because I want to try to say this without being too depressing. I don't know if we get civility back because of this thing, to be honest with you, because of where the Democrats are playing like it's another time. Right. And they complain, yes, it was very uncivil that he started out trashing his predecessors. You showed that thing about wrestling before and where we are. This is our culture now. We are a fighting culture. And the civility of another time, I don't know if it's coming back. And that's a message to Democrats that if you want to play to win, because that's what the other side does. So it's a depressing thought, but I don't know if we go back to this more civil.
But there's such a disconnect, and maybe I'm alone crazy? Here.
Yes, but that's neither here nor there.
And I was saying to somebody, the reason why I still have hope, Steph, is I can't speak for anybody else, but I live in a community where there are a lot of Donald Trump supporters. And if I go to Little League baseball games, even if I coach an entire team whose parents are Trump supporters, if I go to a movie in town, when we're walking through the airport, wherever I go, occasionally there are exceptions, but they are very, very rare. And in person, very, very rarely does anybody come up and even begin to cross the line of civility. I have found, we talk about this gives license to be a jerk. I will tell you in person, and maybe I'm naive, but I don't think it's naive if it's your lived experience over years. People, for the most part, are kind, even if they disagree with you in person.
So those kind people have to not be passive right now, right? The social media universe has figured out the one thing that sells better than sex is rage, and the algorithm is set to link in to all of our.
And Stephanie, who was there? Who was there with him?
And that's what's so important, right? You guys talked about it here yesterday. Donald Trump wasn't just flanked by huge business people who are running the Gap or Walmart or ExxonMobil. The people surrounding Donald Trump were the people who run information around the world. Those biggest CEOs, right? Not just, they're really wealthy. Guess what? Every president is surrounded by wealthy people. You got wealthy donors lining the pockets of all sorts of politicians. But it's who was surrounding Donald Trump, right? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, and then just a few seats away, back to Donnie's last point.
Dana White.
Dana White of the UFC was basically seated, triangular behind President Obama and George Bush. And so I'm not as defeatist as Donnie is to say, like...
I'm talking in politics, not in everyday life. And I just think that civility in politics, I don't know if that comes back.
Okay, but you can have civility in politics while you're playing sophisticated chess. You don't have to civility in politics while you're playing a dopey Pollyanna game. That's the difference.